gains, it must be shared equally. Yes. But also on the issue of corporate governance, I think it talks to all the spheres, depending on, because we are talking about Africa, depending on the governance structure that country has opted to follow. In our case, with abilities in the constitution, I think it's chapter 7, that's also corporate governance, that the other spheres, whether it's the national and the provincial, have a role to play in ensuring the functionality of the municipalities. Hence, you sometimes see the intervention of government in those structures, but also the issue of managing the issues of grants that are given to all the structures, cooperative governance that cuts across all the spheres. But on the socio-economic development, I think it's where issues of new terms like local economic development, giving opportunities to the local people in terms of, or in the economy of that particular country. I think that's where we then speak of the SED events.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for contextualizing it. I think if I just summarize from what input I received from your role, that I hear human rights and their DPG. I hear elections. I hear rule of law. So yes, those are the issues that are tackled actually under DPG. Also, just to confirm, yes, under EGM, economic governance and management, that's where you will also where we will also address the issues of unemployment, the issues of tax policies, the issues of so that will be addressed under EGM. In terms of corporate governance, that's now where we will address now like the issues of like corporate social responsibility for companies, mining companies, for instance, that are exploiting in the country, and so on and so forth. And in socio-economic development, additionally to what you have said, we're also addressing issues such as like infrastructure, making sure that trying to assess if the actual women have, or girls actually have access to education. So access to education is also addressed there, and so on and so on and so forth. So, and the state resilience, that's where the issue now in terms of like country readiness to face epidemics like Ebola or so on and so forth, or if there's a mudslide in the country because of the rains, do we have actually enough structures, enough resources to address such issues? So that's how we determine that we will get into the questionnaire, the tool that APRM used to do that. And I would like also to touch on just now on who are the different actors that actually come and play into that field, and how we manage to bring together or around the table state actors and non-state actors to actually have some kind of a dialogue or discussion and come up with sustainable solutions when it comes to certain of these issues. So yes, as I mentioned, we have a questionnaire that addresses all those 5 areas, and we will definitely dwell a bit more into them. And I will also touch on how is it that we make use of that questionnaire. Okay, so next we will address, I shall present to you the different countries, member states, or we like to actually refer to them as participating states of the African peer review mechanism. We have 4 North African countries, we have 12 West African countries, 9 Southern African countries, 10 East African countries, and Central Africa 8, and in total that makes 43 member states. So you will see that there's different colors coded on the screen. We have countries in green, we have countries in red, some are underlined, some are not underlined. And basically the countries in green are the countries that have undergone a first generation peer review. That means that have produced already one country report on governance, comprehensive report on governance, looking at all those 5 pillars we've discussed. For the countries in red, those are the countries that have gone twice for those reviews, and there are 5 of them. South Africa is part of it. South Africa has just completed its second 2021. South Africa. So I hope you will be involved and I hope you will look out for it. And then the countries, sorry, is there any question? Oh.
When so it's 18.
Yes. Organizing it, but then APRM basically we're facilitating. So I think definitely we can put a word in for you. Yes. All right. So the countries that are underlined are the ones that have gone through. So for countries that have gone through target review, I'll explain to you different type of reviews. We also have what is called targeted reviews. So there's a comprehensive review that look at all 5. Yes.
Given an opportunity is to understand when is the launch, approximately. You don't always wait. It should be second half. Second half. Launch. Okay. Yeah. Now let's do it. We are in the last term. Right. Okay. Yeah. By this time, maybe. No. So long is this. Yeah.
No, let's hope it's this year. But my colleague, Mr. Dalma, who's online, would definitely give more details about that. He's the coordinator. Actually, he's the one you should be asking for invitation as the coordinator. Yes, so we have which touches on all the 5 thematic areas. So what happens is that we go into countries, we go onto the field, interact with the different stakeholders, non-state actors and state actors, and then basically we take them through all those the questionnaire and the different areas of the APRM pillars. And then we consolidate a report which the president of that country goes and presents to his peers at the APRM Forum of Head of State and Government. This happens every year on the margins of the AU Assembly, the African Union Assembly in Addis Ababa. So that's for the comprehensive review, but the targeted review now is a more focused type of review because the country will now select themes on which the APRM team will work with the country to develop a report that will speak to that issue. Let's say corruption, let's say natural resource extractions, let's say, you name it, gender equality, gender-based violence. So then we will develop tools that will speak to that issue, and then that will lead to a report that we will call a targeted peer review report. And then lastly, we have 5 countries that have undertook early warning / and constitutional changes of government targeted reviews. This happened last year. This is a new product, if I can call it, of the APRM. And we had focused on issues of constitutional changes of governments because in the last decade, we've seen a rise in terms of and constitutional changes of government. So like coup d'etats, change of constitution and change of constitutions, and so on and so forth. So those are the issues that we wanted to target, and actually we got that mandate from the head of state and government, following also some consultation with the Peace and Security Council. So that's more or less it. Then we can go a bit further down into the national structures and their role. So the national structures of the APRM, the focal point, this is usually a minister. For South Africa, for instance, the focal point is the Minister of the Department of Public Service and Administration. So this is the focal point who will report, the minister who will report on APRM related issues directly to the president. So, for instance, for the development of the country review report of the APRM had worked with the Department of Public Service and Administration, and they are the one that have pulled together basically the whole process. But I would like to mention that the key to the success of the review process in the country is actually the National Governing Council. Some countries call it council, some countries call it commission. And this council basically is composed of all the different trenches of the society. So it will include specifically that the civil society organizations. That's when you will have your women groups, you will have the youth involved groups, the media. You will have basically all the private sector also will come in, and they will come together and form the National Governing Council. And then we also have the National Secretariat. So the National Secretariat now is in South Africa. It sits in the office of the Department of Public Service and Administration, and they're the focal points. So they are the one that assists, they're like the assisting hand of the NGC, the National Governing Council, and the focal point minister. And in terms of, so for the NGC, like I mentioned, is one of the most important structure actually of the APRM, because the APRM promotes and encourage broad-based participation, meaning that when we engage into a process of reviews for governance, a governance review, we really emphasize on the fact that the NGC must be represented by all arms of the society, and especially the citizenship. It's also emphasized that the National Secretariat actually has to bring together those different actors around the table. And in terms of the NGC, the role really of the NGC, like I say, is to deepen citizen participation, deepen the principle of national governance ownership, and I'd like to underline ownership, because technically when we talk about ownership, it's not just the government, we're talking about citizens' ownership as well. Meaning, for instance, when the report will be launched and the recommendations in the National Plan of Action, which is in that report, once those recommendations have been made public and we had that plan also highlights the different actors, then it means that government and citizens are equally responsible. So like they will have to hold each other accountable, in the sense that government will need the citizens to be able to support the government into his process of implementation. And the citizen will also have to make sure that the government is held accountable in terms of what the government has agreed that it will implement. Makes it very difficult in terms of implementation. And also it's hard to account in terms of like making sure that all stakeholders are equally represented. So composition, and yes. Not this. I think we can definitely skip it. Okay, so we've been talking about in terms of the structures. There's a schema which I think speak to it quite in a very the structures of the APRM have twofold, like the continental level and the national level. As I mentioned, the focal point is the one that is basically the link between the national structure and the continental structures, because the focal point is the one that reports directly to the president on APRM issues, and the focal point is the one to whom the National State Secretariat and the National Governing Council as well. So, like I mentioned, National Governing Council has civil societies, private sector also represented. And in terms of the continental structures, which I hadn't touched on, we have what we call the API panel of eminent person. If you were in the private sector, it would be more or less the equivalent of a board for the APRM, but for a company. But this is now a continental level, and those panel members actually nominated by the head of state. So it is a political appointment. Then we have the APRM Forum of Head of States. This is where the APRM report presents all its reports to, like the South African report of states and governments, to the APRM Forum of Head of State and Government by His Excellency President Ramaphosa. So each country that undergoes the APRM process actually has to report back to the APRM Forum of Head of States. And this is where now the different, all the head of states get to now review experiences. They will critique the report. They will provide compliments. They will provide comments on the report, so that this country can actually take on those different comments and then improve the report and make sure that that the implementation can follow respectively. Yes, so we also have the committee of focal points at continental level and different member states that come together and form a committee. This committee has a steering committee, and we also have a continental committee of the NGC's National Governing Councils and the National Secretariats. So that's more or less what the APRM looks like in terms of structures and in terms of process. I would like to go into the process, and then I will invite Mr. Dalmar Jama to come and give a bit more of a practical example about how this process actually applies in the South African context. I think that might also be interested to ask questions about how actually the process in South Africa has taken place, and so on and so forth. So yes, the review, there are 4 different types of reviews. I've already touched on the country review and the targeted review. We also have periodic reviews, and I've also highlighted early warning reviews. We actually did an early warning review, which we referred has a gap analysis for Sudan, right place in 2019. Yes, and actually in that gap analysis report, some of the issues that have actually triggered happening in Sudan again as we speak were actually highlighted in the report we did in 2020. No separation of powers, for instance, in Sudan, right after the coup, issue of not having a dialogue with the different parties, or the different lack of communication that are using to speak to each other. It means that the transition will not be able to be effective. And so we had highlighted quite a few issues that actually now, unfortunately, are being proven to be right, because now there's tension, and actually there's this tension as we speak in Sudan that have arisen again. So this is just an example of how the APRM has tried to play its role of early warning instrument or mechanism. 6 stages: establishment of national structures, be called upon to partake into the process, where you would be taking part into consultations with the APRM and the APRM team and the South African NGC, National Governing Council, where these consultations would have led now to recommendations into the reports, and those recommendations would have led now into a national plan of action. The national plan of action, some of those recommendations that are inside the national plan of action, I will give a few examples, for instance, of what is currently in the national plan of action for the latest country review report of APRM, and it will give you a chance of maybe reflecting around that. We will do that towards the end. But then at least that national plan of action is supposed to work hand in hand or be integrated within countries' national develop this plan of action to compete with existing development plan, but actually to be integrated within. After the self-assessment, we go through, that's when we do the field missions, where we interact with the different actors, state actors, non-state actors. And like I mentioned, this is where the legislative power comes and plays a role, because we will consult the parliaments on the laws that are actually on the different issues. For instance, if there's an issue of gender-based violence, I'm just thinking about it. If there's an issue of gender-based violence, then we will consult the parliament and the difference that gap, and then provide recommendations. Then we will draft the report, and it will be validated through the different AU, to the different APRM policy and or decision makers, and then it will be submitted to the head of state and government. After that, it should be published by the country, and the country needs to make sure that all stakeholders are invited around the table. And because, like I mentioned, this report has to be widely owned, and the principle of accountability is very important, because that's where we can make sure, we can ensure that they will be. So that's why it's very important for like the different stakeholders to be aware of the report, what it entails, and who's responsible to implement what and how. And all that is provided into the report. We provide a national plan of action, which is part of the report, which now we work. Actually, APRM has also a team that works with countries in terms of, following the progress of the implementation. And yes, so lastly, that's the last progress reporting. So with that said, I would like to invite my colleague, Mr. Dalmar. I hope he is.
Good afternoon, my sister Diana. I hope you can.
Volume a bit higher.
Okay. Should I make it louder?
Okay. No, we are good to go, Mr. Dalmar. We can hear you.
Thank you very much, Diana. I think you actually gave a very succinct and actually quite comprehensive presentation on what we were trying to do with respect to in South Africa. I was hoping that you would give me the opportunity, because I'm more of a, details oriented. If I can just put a brief presentation on the screen, would that be acceptable?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. I know I've gone against your what you had asked for, but I know you're very indulgent of me, and I thank you for that. So can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I know that my sister Diana has gone quite comprehensively over some of the topics I'll be covering. And she had only asked, but I thought that this can be a sort of like a knowledge base. We can share it with you. just to discuss a little bit more about what we have done with respect to South Africa's second review. And there are certain points that I will really go rapidly over, but I will share this presentation with you. So you already know what we are. We are basically Africa's governance workshop. And the reason we say workshop is because it is a continuously running process. It's not a one-time process. As you know, governance is the nitty-gritty, and it is the day-to-day. And what we are trying to do, the reason we had a second review of South Africa, and we will have future reviews, is that there is never a final. It is a continuous process where you try to improve as you go along. Diana, will you let me know if you can hear me quite well and if I can continue?
No, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try to go a little bit faster and respect the time that you gave me. So you know about our mandate